Welcome to Building a Transformational Company webinar. Very exciting to be running this. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are from. My name's Harvey Wade. I'll introduce myself in a moment. But thank you for those that are completing the poll questions. We'll come back to those. So if I'm boring you a little bit already, then please complete the poll question. My name is, as I said, is Harvey Wade. I run Innovate 21. This is an organization where our purpose is to deliver innovation impact using a systematic organizational wide approach, really coming from the fact that a lot of organizations don't get the innovation impact that they really desire and want. But we're actually going to be partnering. We're partnering with Strategy Tools, and we've got a number of folks from Strategy Tools joining us for this webinar, and going to be bringing their perspectives on transformation. These are unprecedented times, as I'm sure we're all aware. The need for transformation and that capability of being able to change has never been greater. So I'm really excited that we're working with Strategy Tools to really develop your capabilities and our capabilities in these areas. So in terms of today, just a sort of slight kind of way of, I guess, housekeeping. Appreciate that everybody is kind of at home, so broadband and connections are always going to be slightly hazy, and we've all got kids kind of running around as well, some of us. So, you know, at some point, one of the presenters may have some bandwidth issues, so please do bear with us if we do hear that, hit any of those problems. And then also, do ask questions. You should say it's on your Zoom. Add in the question. That'd be great. If they're relevant, we'll ask the question during the presentation, but most of them will probably leave to the end. There will be a Q&A session, and I will make sure that the panelists keep their time and don't go over and allow us to maybe ask some really good questions to them. So I think that's probably about it on the housekeeping. In terms of the poll, so thank you everybody who's completed that. So so level of disruption. So people are experiencing a fairly high level of disruption. The majority is around sort of an average around 4 or 5. In terms of your organization, actually some organizations aren't experiencing much disruption, which is interesting. But actually we're seeing a lot more people kind of, an organization is also experiencing a lot of disruption. And then in terms of how quickly do you expect to be back to some normal? Everybody's thinking at least 3 months. Most of you are thinking around 6 months, and some of you are thinking actually we're never going to be back to normal. That's really interesting. So thank you for your perspectives there. It's really interesting. So one of the things that we talk about when we think about transform is, yeah, actually you need to start before you need to. By the time the data says you absolutely must transform, is often too late to do so. So this is from Scott Anthony, senior partner at Innovate. I think is really interesting is what can you do now to transform? We were talking about transformation before this whole virus thing was hitting everybody. Transformation is vital, and how do we do it? So at this point, I'm going to introduce Chris. Chris is based in Norway. He runs Strategy Tools. He's also been running an innovation and strategy consultancy called Engage Innovate for the last, I guess, 20 years, Chris. And works a lot with the business schools. He works a lot with entrepreneurs and startups, running a lab, but also invests in entrepreneurs. So he doesn't just kind of help them, he puts his money where his mouth is as well. In terms of today, Christian, I'm just going to quickly run through the introduction and hand over to yourself to run through. So we're going to introduce, okay, what is transformation? What are the types of transformation? What are the 10 principles of transformation that we've looked at? What's the roadmap? How do you transform? And then we'll bring in some of the panelists to give their perspectives on transformation, and then we'll move to a Q&A session. So I think that's about it. So Christian, do you want to take over the sharing, or do you want me to click screens for you? I think you're on mute, Christian.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Harvey. So I just see we have the first question. So the first question from Rob. Yes, absolutely. We'll be sharing out the slides afterwards, Rob, and also the video recording. So yeah, thank you for the invitation, Harvey, and thank you for joining everyone. These are interesting times indeed. And we started working on this concept around building a transformational company about a year and a half ago. And it's really built on what does it take? What does it take to adapt and transform across different industries? And what I want to share with you today and also discuss with Harvey and the team here is what does this mean? What are the key learnings? And then we're going to share with you two very specific tools that you can apply yourself in your work on transformation. So I just want to go through this. I'll refer first back to the report. So you can, you probably have access to it already, but you can download the report, strategytools.io/BTC. And in that report, you'll also find reference to the workbook. Now, in the workbook, you'll find a range of new tools. In total, in the workbook, there are now 10 brand new tools developed as a part of this work, as a part of this report. And you'll also find that, you know, adapting to the times, we have shifted a lot of the work that Harvey is doing and others are doing onto online platforms. So right now you can actually go online and you can sign up for Building Transformational Company online learning platform, completely self-paced. You can run one that is both self-paced and with 5 live webinars, where we basically work on your project online. And we also have the Building Transformation Company as a complete corporate and customized program. So even though people are locked down, they still have to get work done. And now you can actually work with us on the online platform. And on this online platform, there's also a range of different programs, including a range of free mini courses. So for those of you with a little bit of free time on your hands, you can actually go and learn about leading through industry shifts. You can learn about startup survival and other programs that are on the academy. Anyway, let's get started. I want to just ask you quickly to look at this, and like Harvey introduced on the topic of transformation. This is a 10-year market cap for two leading companies from 2010 to 2011. So what you're seeing here in orange is the share price market cap for ExxonMobil and the share price market cap for Equinor. Here you're seeing something different. Here you're still seeing the same blue and orange lines, Equinor and ExxonMobil. It's the same period, so it's the same 10-year period, but you now see a green line. That green line is also an energy company. So you're seeing the blue line and the orange lines are basically trending relatively identical for the first 6 years. And then they have some variance between 2017 to 2020. But you have this green. This green is an example. This, ladies and gentlemen, this is what transformation looks like. This is a Danish company called Ørsted. It's formerly known as Dong Energy. And Dong Energy went through a massive transformation process some years ago where they realized that the future would not be in traditional fossil fuel, oil and gas and coal. The future of energy would be in renewable. And back in 2017, they basically shifted completely and transformed into a leading clean energy company. And when you get a little bit closer, you can see here the 2017, 18, 19, and there's a massive discrepancy in how the market values them and how the market looks at the future potential and the future outlook for these companies. And what's really interesting now is that for the first time ever, Ørsted is having conversations, could we become the world's first green super major? A super major, of course, is a term from the oil and gas industry, where companies are saying, how do we become a super sized or super large energy company? Fascinating thing is, all the energy companies had access to the same information. All the energy companies had access to the same resources, people, financing. 5 years ago, these companies were pretty much identical in terms of size and value. And today we're seeing Ørsted with a massive breakout growth. This is what transformation looks like. We're going to be showing you a few examples as we proceed. So one of the first questions that we had to answer with the report is what is transformation? And there are many different understandings. So the way we define transformation, it is a significant, lasting, and non-reversible change to the company's value creation logic. So how the company creates value. Now, some people want to bring in business models, and business models is a big part of that. But it's also a lot more than just the business models. Some people also want to bring in the digital, and digital, of course, may be a part, but it's more. So a lot of people like to use the word business transformation or strategic transformation to indicate how it's different. Because we did find quite easily that there are three things that transformation is not. Number one is not HR-led change management, like we need a culture program or we need to transform the way we work. That's completely inadequate. It is not a semi-digital transformation where we implement an SAP system or we implement Facebook Workplace or other sort of tweaks. And it's definitely not investing a little bit in innovation in the sense of a hackathon or a couple of innovation labs or investing in a few startups. These things are completely insufficient towards what we would define and what we define in the report as transformation. So how do we recognize? I'll take you through this very briefly, and you can read more about it in the report. So first of all, it's really a question of over time realizing that you have a growing revenue pool coming from entirely new areas. So transformation is not about optimizing your core. It is about developing your new growth and explore areas. And over time, and that time period we find is typically around 10 years, so maybe 7, maybe 12, but it's roughly around 10 years. You gradually, slowly at first, and then increasingly faster, shift your revenue generation into these new areas. And after a little bit of time, these new areas suddenly have a higher profit margin. And eventually, analysts, management, media will realize, hey, this company is now getting 40% of its profits from this new business area. What's going on? And then as that sort of train picks up steam, you'll see that gradually they'll be shifting out their old assets and they'll be developing those new assets. And this is a systematic, repeatable process that we've identified and mapped out, and we're going to share with you today. It's also important that we have to recognize that transformation is everywhere. We find so many examples of ongoing transformation or companies that are just sort of facing massive industry shifts and disruption. Banking, energy, utility, telcos, automotive, and conglomerates are just some of the industries. And increasingly, the more we look, the more we realize that the need for transformation is much bigger than maybe just 5 years ago. And we referred to one Accenture study that said about 71% of 10,000 companies are currently facing or just on the brink of a significant disruption. So this matters. Having this transformational capabilities matters. Another thing that we found, and we've been getting quite a lot of buzz feedback around this, is that there are three very distinct different types of transformation, and they are fundamentally different. These are what we call the three types of transformation: shock, shift, and evolution. Shock is when the company realizes it too late, and by the time they get it, it's probably too late to actually pull this off successfully. This is when you start talking about what is your burning platform, and this is when you start talking about this is our Nokia moment, or this is our Kodak moment, or this is our Blockbuster moment, because by the time they realized, it was pretty much too late. The second is shift. Shift is very different. Shift is when management realize early enough, and then they do a sudden strategic shift. It's abrupt, it's very demanding, and it requires very bold leadership. And the leading example is Adobe, which I'm going to share with you in a second. And then we have evolution. Evolution is a step-by-step process. It's very much a evolutionary process over time. It follows a repeatable pattern. And one of our friends, Rita McGrath, she would call it continuous reconfiguration of your assets or your portfolio assets. And one of the best cases we have is actually Microsoft with what the new CEO has been able to pull off so far. So those three types. Let's start with Nokia. This is an interesting quote from Stephen Elop, the former CEO. How did we get to this point? Why did we fall behind when the world around us was evolving much faster? This is what I've been trying to understand, and I believe that we lacked leadership to align and direct the company through these disruptive times. I believe we lacked leadership to align and direct the company. And then Stephen Elop said, Nokia, our platform is burning. So this is a typical reflection you may see by the time people realize that we are actually far behind the curve. We are in this shock. That's the first. The second, the shift is Adobe. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Adobe case study, it's extremely interesting to see what they've been able to do. The first thing that analysts say is that it's really the speed of this transformation that has really impressed or stunned competitors on Wall Street alike. And even financial analysts didn't really grasp it because it was such a shift for them early on. And if you backtrack to the Adobe case, you can actually see that they started talking or started preparing the financial markets for this in 2012. But one of the things that they did uniquely was what we call generating a different narrative. So what is the story that you tell your analysts in your financial markets? And then guide on a new narrative and on new metrics. And a very interesting self-reflection from the management team at Adobe that led this work was that we understood, and we understood very well, that companies that simply stick to what has made them successful in the past is inevitably leaving themselves open to disruption. So this is kind of the pattern and the language you would see on the second type of innovation, of transformation, the shift. The third, evolution. And here we have Microsoft as a good example. And Microsoft, which I hope many of you have been paying attention to, has really gone through a cultural and a strategic. And I think it's important to emphasize the and, so both cultural and strategic transformation. And the new management team has basically added close to $1 trillion to Microsoft's market cap, which is completely unheard of. And being able to do that with a company that was effectively dying with Windows and boxes is incredible. And this is what incredible looks like. This is the same time period that we saw earlier on, so 10 years. And in green, you're seeing ExxonMobil. And in orange, you're seeing Microsoft's share price over that same period. And as you can see, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, even 16, these two charts were pretty much trending along the same curves. And it was only in 2016 that Microsoft really started breaking out. And again, this is a normal pattern that we find, that early in that transformation process, capital markets don't recognize it, capital markets don't buy into it, capital markets don't really pay attention to it, and it takes a little bit of time to get that breakout effect when you do it well. And this is what it looks like doing it well. So what are the implications? In the report, we describe this in great detail. We have spotted a very specific management pattern of what does management teams do that puts them on the shock, the shift, or the evolution path. And in the online learning program, we go through in great detail the management side and the leadership side behind the shock, shift, and evolution. One of the big things we see, of course, on the shock is that management will actively ignore weak signals. In Shift, we very often find a pattern, and there was a formal strategy review that led us on this path. While evolution can really be understood as a starting very, very, very small, starting with your small bets, and then slowly, gradually expanding up. If you look at Microsoft's cloud offering today, you can backtrack that to the time when there was one employee for all of Microsoft that was responsible for the cloud. And then it started from there. In the report and also in the online program, we identify what we call a lot of ongoing transformation cases. So cases that are still up in the air. We don't know how they're gonna come out. One of these that we follow very closely is Volkswagen, representing, if you will, the German automotive industry. And the big question that we ask, will they survive? They got a new CEO. That's part of the patterns that we see. He comes in and he says, we have to slaughter our sacred cows. And he says, Volkswagen, this is our Nokia moment. This is our company on a burning platform. If they don't get it right, they run the risk of 400 to 800,000 unemployed around that company. So it's a pretty significant responsibility for Herbert Diess, which is the new CEO, to guide this transformation successfully. Then Herbert asks recently in one of the speeches he had, are we well enough prepared for what's coming? And then he answers his own question with saying, probably not. So that's some of the findings that we have around the three types that I've worked with. Also in the report and the online program, we have identified what we call the 10 principles of transformation. And the 10 principles of transformation is laid out like this, where we have 10 sort of significant steps: understanding industry shifts, master ecosystems, and then eventually invest more and repeat. And in the different programs, we're going to go into extensive detail around each of these. We instruct how to get through them and really try to build up what we call organizational capabilities that allows companies to handle these in a good manner. So the final thing I want to share with you, connecting back to these 10 principles, is what we call the transformational roadmap. And the transformation roadmap is the 10 principles put into a timeline format with a checklist functionality that allows you, whether you're a CEO, whether you're a board member, whether you're a chief strategy officer, innovation officer, transformation officer, it allows you to guide your company through these three phases. Phase number one, understanding the landscape. Phase number two, designing the journey. And phase number three, building the operation. These 10 principles of transformation, now put into a roadmap, is designed to help people basically pick this up and start working with it quite quickly. You don't need to read a lot of books. You don't need to do a lot of training. You can start using the tools and apply them to your own company or your own clients. So that's what I'd like to share with you. You can download the report for free. You can have a look at some of the free online programs. You can sign up for the online training programs. We have a special discount that goes out to all the participants today. But we've been getting a lot of interest from a lot of different parts of the world in how can we start applying these insights on how to build a transformational company. So I hope that's interesting and I hope that's useful to you.
Thank you, Christian. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. I do see, Lee, we've got a question for you, but I might bring that into the Q&A session, if I may. I just want to get some of the other panelists' view on this. So, Christian, I'm happy to now share if you want to stop.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have three beautiful people here. Guys, I'm afraid I've worked out that as you have to do black and white photos now because it's kind of just makes you look a bit better. So apologies for that. But I think what I wanted to do is all these guys who will introduce themselves. All are working with strategy tools. Scott, you've got a huge experience of working with lots of organizations, both from family firms to large multinationals, obviously having quite a large client base in China and being impacted, and also living in Italy, which might be quite interesting at the moment. I'd just like to ask you a question from your perspective in transformation. How is disruption impacting your clients, and what are you seeing that they are doing to transform?
Yeah, as you can imagine, we have a lot of disruption, not only in Italy and China, but also with our clients in America, in Latin America, in Africa, etc. We're really seeing 5 main areas. The first being supply side risk, where people are not able to receive critical materials. The second being safety. I think back to the quote of Donald Rumsfeld during the Gulf War. He said, we can divide events into known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And at the moment, a lot of companies are facing unknown unknowns as we just don't have enough data. And then we're also seeing demand fluctuations. Tin groceries are facing a 300% demand increase, whereas investment bankers have gone to zero. One of the investment bankers I was speaking with yesterday mentioned we have never been in a world with zero revenues. It's a major paradigm shift. And as we know from the energy industry, we're also experiencing some wild price variations that haven't been seen before.
Yeah.
You know, Harvey, looking at organization of people during a pandemic, where do they work from? Were the contingency plans sufficient? One major employer we're working with, their HR department spending 70% of their time helping employees to get chairs, desks, printers, noise canceling headphones. A number of people have been used to working at home, but what we haven't seen before is the entire family being home and working together at the same time. As an example, earlier this week, I was on a webinar with London Business School. 88% of the 2,000 participants were working from home. And then, of course, we have the liquidity issues. S&P Global downgraded 121 companies earlier today. Blackstone and Carlyle have instructed their portfolio companies to draw down all credit lines. And JP Morgan saw an activation of $367 billion in revolving credit last week, which is a historic amount. So I think, you know, how does this lead to digital transformation? Well, talking with Diane Garrison, who's head of HR for IBM, she sees this as a huge opportunity. They're hiring new employees. They're using AI to identify opportunities to address personal issues. Here in Milan, the fashion leader Prada has converted production of their clothing line to making safety uniforms for doctors and nurses to protect them from biohazards. LVMH in France, in 72 hours, changed their perfume factory for Dior into a hand sanitizer line. Ferrari is using their idled F1 team to make ventilators. And we saw the movie industry like NBC Universal, they're launching new movies online, something that has never been done before. And in Germany, we noted McDonald's is taking their employees who are idled and redeploying them to work at Aldi, the grocery chain, to help out with that. And then in Bangkok, we saw the 5-star hotel group Anatara. They've launched a room service menu, all online, and you can have delivery anywhere within 5 kilometers of the city. It's a change in the way people are doing business. I mean, I even think about very conservative areas like medicine. Telemedicine in the United States was not permitted by law except for Medicare until this morning. And with the emergency bill that was passed by the government, now telemedicine is being used in all 52 states. So we're seeing changes that are going to be relatively permanent. My last thing I'd think about, you know, Google Trends is noting the words grocery delivery have a 2,000% increase in searches. And countries like Italy and Norway and Holland are really changing and thinking about how we're going to work. And this is creating new possibilities where people are saying, why did we do it this way? And which is a very powerful question.
Mm. Wow, there's a lot packed into a few minutes there, Scott. It's amazing. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Really interesting perspectives, and I think your global perspective is fascinating as well. So thank you for that. Abdul, going to be coming to you next. So Abdul, obviously a bit of a Cisco veteran, obviously, and being somebody that's worked from home for maybe 20, 25 years. I'm maybe being kind to you there. But
maybe not that long.
One of the things you've obviously led, you know, leading strategy, but with so many leaders unexpectedly working from home, working virtually, working with their kids running around, what are some of your top tips for allowing them to kind of almost start forming some of those strategic plans when they actually can't meet face to face in the traditional way?
Thanks, Harvey. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You know, the interesting thing is, and to pick up on the points that Scott just made, I think this is a sea change, and some of the things that we are now putting in place will not be reversed. They just cannot be, and they will not be. And so companies that have resisted remote workers, companies that have refused to accept that some activities can be done remotely or away from the office, are now having to address it. And I think if we move to the next slide here, I'd like to start off with really sort of the high level perspective of what do you do as a leader, as a manager in the business, in terms of addressing some of these very practical issues. So the next slide, please. So the first one is collaboration tools and communication tools are now easily accessible, and whether it's sort of Google Hangouts, whether it's Microsoft Teams, whether it's Zoom or WebEx, my key recommendation here is, as a company, as an organization, standardize on a set of tools and make it the standard. It doesn't really matter which one, it's whichever one is most comfortable. Next one, please. Just go through all of them, just open them all up. The second thing I want to point to is one of the things many companies suffer from, especially IT organizations, is they usually have the lone hero or the lone wolf, and this in consulting organizations, it's very similar, who is the go-to person for everything. Well, that's all very well and good if you're easily accessible and available in the office. It's not so good if you're away from the office. So I think this is a time to reassess those points of challenge, let me call it, and specialization. The third thing is working away from home, or away from the office, working at home. You need to make sure things are more visible and more measurable, and that entirely is down to your work practices. One of the ways to do this is have regular dashboards, leaderboards, make sure that you're using some of the tools that are out there for whiteboarding, in MS Whiteboard or Zoom as a whiteboard feature, and a number of others. WebEx, for example, has something similar as well. This is also a time to focus on quality, as we're all at home, distracted likely with children at home as well as probably pets and a whole sort of zoo of other noises. Quality may suffer. So one of the things is, as a leader, ensure you have processes in place to address quality in terms of the work that's being done. In times of stress, one of the key things is don't micromanage. I know it's a very natural thing to do if you're not used to working remotely with your staff, or certainly having the majority of people not coming in. One of the key things in this challenge as we head into it is fallback positions, disaster recovery positions for most companies, and including most of the standards organizations, have always assumed one or two of the key sites are always up and running. There was never the assumption nobody come to work. So one of the key things I would certainly recommend here as part of the transformation strategy is readdress your disaster recovery plans, and address also what to do in the event that nobody can physically come into some of your locations. And that really will address, technological challenges, but also social and communication challenges. And the last thing is, stop watching the cat videos. Let's catch up on some back burner projects. It's a great time to do this. Things like our online training programs, they're easily accessible. Join, you can sort of address them in your own time, and there's no rush. They're open, I think, from the time you join to when you finish, so there's no real timeout on them. And lots of other companies are offering similar things. So that's from a leadership position. I think it's very simple, practical advice. Let's have a look at, as individuals then, what we do. As individuals, I think the key thing is, if you're not used to working from home, ergonomics is absolutely critical. And the first thing is, find somewhere that is dedicated. For example, my environment here, I've got daylight lamps on all the time, which means that my body just doesn't sort of fall below the, when the energy levels drop. And this is also very good for winter working as well. Second thing is make sure the desk space that you have is appropriate. I know we're all used to working from, the sofa or the dining room table or whatever. Well, that's okay for an hour or so in the evening or in the morning, but when you're doing it permanently for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, it's no longer practical, and health issues may result from this. So address that, look into it. Likewise with ergonomic chairs, etc. Invest in one, because we don't see this kind of working going away anytime soon. Broadband, this is obvious information, but the key thing here is hands-free options. Keep the hands free, and make sure you have some way of having microphone capability to do that hands-free option, and make sure the bandwidth is adequate. Upgrade if it's not. I've been on several calls this week where as soon as they switched the video on, the links went down. Multifunction printer, invest in one. I know we don't print that much, but occasionally, now that you're at home, you don't have access to the work facilities. It will be useful anyway. And make sure you're well ventilated and well hydrated. These are very simple, practical advice. The goal here is that we are not, if you're not used to working alone, I've been doing it for about 15, 20 years now. My environment is pretty much wherever I move. That's my first concern. If you're not used to doing it, then the key thing is it will take psychologically a bit of a change as well. So let me stop there, Harvey.
Cool. Thank you, Abdul.
Thank you.
So I have to stop watching the cat videos. Yeah.
Yes, please.
All right. Nice background as well. We can talk about that one day.
Thank you,
Andy. Back to you, sir. Andy. Technology for since the day you were born, I think. So, but I think so. Lots going on with in Andy's personal life as well. Just becoming a dad, but. One of the things that Andy does is he's also a trained coach, and I think it's really interesting, Andy. So just with your kind of coaching hat on and with your experience, how do you think leaders can kind of best create the mindset to be able to cope and lead this transformation with all that's going on?
Yeah, thanks very much, Harvey. Hopefully my bandwidth is good enough. I've got a solid environment as per Abdul's instructions, so hopefully you can see and hear me. I have actually used the virtual background, so you might be able to see that. That's mainly just to hide the washing, which is sitting behind me. So hopefully the working from home techniques are working well for the audience. And thanks very much for Christian and for everyone joining. I think it's really important that we've talked very much about the industry shifts. We've talked a lot about the business strategy transformation and how to do it. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about when it comes to transformation is not just the business element to it, but also the personal and human element to it. And this is something that Harvey and I talk about quite a lot. So I just wanted to kind of share with you 3 thought leaders, I think, in this area. And when Harvey asked me to talk about it, these were the ones that really kind of jumped out at me. So Harvey, if we move on to the first slide. So let's talk about driving change in the new world. How can leaders best create the mindset to cope and lead with transformation? For me, the first thing that kind of crops up for me is building trust. And one of the thought leaders that I refer to an awful lot, and I'm not on commission for this book, even though I have probably bought about 50 or 60 copies over the years, is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And one of the things that I kind of talk about when we talk about building trust is you can't drive any type of business transformation. You can't drive really any type of organizational change if there is the absence of trust. Because if there is no trust, then you're unable to move to that next level, which is conflict. Conflict in a work environment is a healthy thing. Providing it's not a personal attack on each other, but you can have moments where you'll have sparring to discuss a particular concept or idea. So for me, the importance of building trust within your teams is really, really important. And that is obviously requires an element of vulnerability. Obviously, in the current situation, building trust over a remote landscape can be very, very difficult. What I've seen happen an awful lot over the last couple of weeks or so is actually the number of people which are now doing virtual coffees. So I know Harvey has been doing this. I've seen it a lot in my LinkedIn community. And I'm also seeing it now an awful lot within the work environment now that I'm back from paternity leave, where people are saying, let's just have half an hour to have a conversation. And there doesn't have to necessarily be an agenda. One of my colleagues who's actually on this call, they did a half-an-hour session to talk about some of their favorite hats that they were using over the last couple of years. So again, it doesn't have to be serious, but it's just having that element of human interaction despite being remote. So I think the first thing for me is building trust as a foundation. I'll also kind of, as we move on, is you need to have vulnerability. And I know that, when we talk about vulnerability, for me, one of the main thought leaders which is cropping up in the world at the moment is Brené Brown. If you haven't seen any of her TED Talks, definitely jump in and see that. Because she talks about vulnerability being one of the sole important elements of any type of innovation project. And she talks about in one of her TED videos where she, after her TED talk, she said that she had this kind of hangover of vulnerability where all of a sudden she just wanted to crawl and disappear under a rock. But once she'd come out of that malaise, she did then come about saying that people were phoning her, corporate companies were saying, look, we want you to come in and talk to our staff about innovation. And they said at the same breath is, but we don't want you to talk to us about any of that vulnerability stuff. We just want to talk to you about innovation. But the key thing to note here is the whole purpose of being vulnerable and having trust is actually innovation is about trying new things. It's about really trying to, encourage people to think differently and be okay if that thing doesn't work out. Mm-hmm. And that takes an element of vulnerability. And if you don't have that vulnerability within your organization and you don't embrace that vulnerability, then we are on a destined way of never actually being able to implement the innovation strategies, the transformational strategies that we need. It's all about embracing the change and for me also embracing that ability to be vulnerable. And the thing with vulnerability, it starts at the top. It starts with the leadership part of the organization. And that's where the final kind of recommendation of thought leadership would be Caroline Dweck. And she talks in her mindset book about the growth mindset. Christian referred back to Satya Nadella and obviously the transformation that Microsoft has been through. And Satya is a major advocate for the growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And the whole kind of concept of growth mindset is absolutely to be able to drive the openness to try and be okay if that thing doesn't work out. So again, embracing that growth mindset would be one of the key takeaways for me around how do we drive this transformation in this new world. So Harvey, I know that we're trying to keep on time. So hopefully those three key points. So talking about the 5 dysfunctions by Patrick Coney, Dare to Lead by Brené Brown, and obviously the mindset by Dr. Caroline Dweck as a little bit of that side project reading to during this lockdown process that we're going through. So thank you very much. And obviously any questions, please don't hesitate to pop me a message.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy. We could spend a whole, well, not just a webinar, a lot longer on this, but thank you, I really appreciate it. So we've kind of come to the end of the sort of our part in terms of speaking. So I wanted to kind of get into some Q&A questions. So please feel free to type in your question and we'll get it answered. Christian, there's a question from Lee on here. So you might need to unmute yourself, but is transformation synonymous, that's a hard word to say at the moment, synonymous with new business models, i.e. An insurance company selling innovative new products is not really transformation, whereas new business models outside of risk transfer would be. So is that a question you can take, Christian?
Absolutely, Harvey, and thank you. And thank you, Lee, for the question. Now, Harvey, could I ask you to flip up the slide with the 10 principles of transformation?
Yeah. Let me just get to the right.
So Lee, your question is a good one, and it's a very common question, and it really goes to the what's the linkage between business models and transformation. So what I'd like to show here with the 10 principles of transformation is you can see. Principle number 1, understand your industry shifts. Principle number 2, master new ecosystems. And then when you work through principle number 6, that's where you get into the business model portfolio and business model innovation. And we found that if a company starts working on new business models without having the wider context, without understanding the industry shifts, without understanding and having access to and being engaged in new ecosystems, if the company starts working on business models before they have a basic innovation strategy in place, it just fizzles out. So having the ability to work on business models, eventually what we call becoming a business model wizard, is really important. But it's only a small piece to a very large puzzle. In the online program, we also have show you right here in the report. We have a very interesting tool that you can actually access for free online. It's called the Transformational Company Index. And the Transformational Company Index has a number of questions around these 10 principles of transformation. And specifically, you have questions here on business models and what is your company's capabilities around business models. So you may want to go online and find the report and go to page 74, and you'll find more on page 74 or 75.
Harvey, well, I'd like to come in here just on that. So I think in the psyche of a lot of individuals, there's some what I would call popular titles still floating around. So for example, In Search of Excellence, Built to Last, What Really Works, Good to Great. The challenge we have with these texts, if we look back on them now retrospectively, given the current environment, is that they all increasingly made bolder and bolder claims that there is some scientific process or a formula to achieving outcomes that you're looking for. And what we've realized in the work that we've done and the work that Chris has been doing is that there is no formula. The path you have to work out for yourself is the one that is necessary for your organization. And this is what the 10 steps are really all about. It's a search process and it's a search algorithm. And at each step of the process, there are questions that need to be asked for you and your firm. And that's really what makes it work at the end of the day. It's not about, well, it worked for that company over there, let me reproduce it, because this was the philosophy of these texts from the history. And so if your psyche is still there, come out of it, understand that's not what we're proposing. This is a different journey. Okay.
Thank you, Abdul. Thanks for that great point. So Lee, thank you. I hope that answers your question. Jean-Philippe asked a question. What would be the best organization to lead transformation for a company? I guess you mean an internal organization here, Jean-Philippe. Christian, what's been your experience in terms of who should have this task?
You're on mute, Chris.
Harvey, if you give me if you take a different question first, I'm going to come back to Jean-Philippe because I want to show something that's not in the official slides.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're going to get something special.
Yes.
Guys, we have Nick Selk. Hi, Nick. How would you differentiate a transformational idea versus transforming your business? Is there any advice on how you might look at spinning out the idea product versus making it part of the core in the long run? Pros and cons. Hey, Scott, do you want to have a go at that one? You're on mute, sorry. Throw you.
So, I mean, it's a bit of a complicated question. Can you give me a part of it you want me to answer, Harvey?
So how would you differentiate between, I guess, a transformational idea versus transforming your business?
Well, a transformational idea might not even be applicable for your company. And it could be you spin off a company. So for example, I've been working with a firm. They had a really great idea for a digital platform, but it didn't fit into their core business. So they actually spun it off and are running it as a completely separate company. Transforming your business means looking at what are the needs of your customers. And then when you take those needs, what's a new way you could solve them? So I think there is some confusion between digitizing an answer and transforming your business digitally. So digitizing an answer is, for example, you take insurance, insurance companies, a lot of them are doing quotes online. That's just taking an old function of an agent and putting it in a digital environment. But now we see some insurance companies that are using AI to predict premiums and risks. That's a completely different way to approach the business. Did I answer your question, Harvey?
Well, it's for Nick, actually. So,
Nick, we've got lots of questions. So Nick, if it's not, you come back to me, buddy. Are you ready, Christine, to answer Jean-Philippe's?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the question was, what would be the best organization to lead transformation for a company? So I'll stop sharing if you want to share something. There we go.
Yeah, so I'll cover this very briefly. So one of the things that we found that we're still trying to get our heads around it fully is we identified what we call the 9 transformation groups, and I'll just jump into something here. And of course, there's much more in the course, but the question was, where does it start and who leads it? So where does it start and who leads it? And what I've sort of darkened out a little bit here is these 9 groups. So if I cover those very briefly, we see a pattern of some transformation starts with internal bottom up. Some has slightly more externalized view. Some have a little bit more management change required, and some have outside pressure. So what I mean by that is, who leads it and who starts it? Well, you can have the strategy function lead it, you can have the management team, you can have the CFO, the CEO, but also in some cases, it's actually outside forces like activist investors. They push through some level, some kind of board change. They bring in a new CEO. So we've been having a lot of interesting work and conversations over the last few weeks on how do we understand how does it start and who leads it. So the answer is that there are these 9 groups, and we see very different examples of configurations, which we discuss more in the online program.
Great, thanks, Christian. I think that's so. I think the answer is it kind of depends on your organization, and it's something to really work out. So what I'll do is I'll go back to sharing my screen again. Yep. Share. Okay, we have, I think, just time for one final question. Stefan, I'll get to yours in something I'm going to say at the end. But Rob Powell, again, I think it's going to go to you, Christian, because I think it's quite interesting. So the step Adobe took in preparing the markets for a downturn in their results during the shift transformation seems to be a step a lot of organizations are unwilling to take. I believe Microsoft experienced the same with their evolution transformation. Is it always necessary? Can you measure it? And how do you best manage it? Appreciate it's a long question. Is it as simple as a multi-year business plan, or is it something a bit more than that? So basically, how do you get your analysts ready to go with you on this journey? Any thoughts on what you've seen in the various stories you've been investigating and researching?
Yeah, so that is a great question, Rob. It is definitely the number1 blocker that prevents many companies from going through or undertaking a transformation because they are afraid of what capital markets will say. What we see in the successful ones is that they put a lot of emphasis on the financial market communication. They typically have a very strategic CFO. We go back and review what those CFOs have been doing and how they've been behaving. It's quite unique. Definitely more work needed. But I think you have to have a clear story. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? What will the long-term implications be? And then you have to communicate. And you also have to track. So it's not so much the multi-year business plan. It is, do you have a clear narrative? Do you have a clear story that you're communicating? And do you have the new KPIs that you're tracking that allows you to prove that you're actually moving in the right direction? So it's possible, it's fully possible, but you can't assume that every company that is going through transformation will experience a short-term dip in their share price, even Microsoft, and then it will start picking up. But it's a question.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Christian. I think it's a deep question, Rob, and I think we can go into that more, but just not now. So I'm just going to appreciate there's maybe a few other questions. We'll get back to you on those questions if we haven't been able to answer them now. Just wanted to kind of let you know a little bit more about some of the other activities. Christian referred to these online programs. So obviously one of the things is people aren't able to get out into workshops. So there's, if you go into this website here, and get the address, there is a self-paced 100% self-paced learning. You can go through, obviously the report is there, but how do you go through and understand how to apply that to your own organization? Then there's another kind of option where we have some live webinars, so get a little bit more of what that could mean for your organization. Get to hear Christian talking about the specific and unpacking some of those things, and kind of the way we've done here, but you've got some exclusive webinars. And then finally, if you think this could be really relevant to your whole corporation or company, then we can obviously customize this and make it so it's far more relevant to your whole organization, and customize it in that way. Again, all virtual, which is obviously what people are looking for at the moment. So there's lots of courses out there. What I'd really encourage you to do is there's a lot of other things out there, some free courses, some paid for courses. Do have a look what's there, and we'll send a link out with some of these building the transformational company links out there as well. So just wanted to, just as a conclusion, just to kind of, before I let you go on your way, I think 3 steps to help you really get started is first of all, transformation is becoming the new normal. As people were saying in the poll, we're not going to go back to how it was. This is fundamentally shifting and changing things. And so transformation is something we need to kind of get used to. And as leaders, we need to understand what are the new tool sets that we need to go through that. It's going to force us to rethink and how we actually build and operate our companies on a global footprint and how we develop our plans going forward. And I think for leaders, transformation is probably your #1 challenge. It was challenging before the coronavirus hit, is even more challenging now. So it's something that we've got to be aware of. And then some conclusion from my perspective. This is not an easy journey. So just because we've got some tools, and Christian showed a very lovely roadmap and it looks all kind of like it's just tick the boxes and you've done it, this is not easy. And as Rob's question is, it takes risk, but if you don't do it, then are you going to be around? You need to create some new maps of where you need to head to, and that's going to take a lot of collaboration to get that going. And whatever strategy used to be, you've got to fundamentally rethink what that strategy is. And just final quote from a guy called Rick, who's a fellow at Berkeley. It's a journey that's measured in years. Do it right and you'll survive. Fail and you might not be around. So this is not a quick fix. This is something that's going to take a long time. So I just wanted to thank you for your time. Thank you for joining this webinar. As we said, it's been recorded, so I know a lot of people did sign up, but then couldn't join live. If you've got any questions, please do reach out to us. Here's our details, and we can go from there. So just want to say thank you to the panelists. Thank you for your involvement, and let you go on your way.